Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Mrs. Richmond's Sinister Garden Gnomes and Creepy Cats. Second half. By Bear Lair 64, Bear Lockhart. I ended up going to the local box hardware store to look at outdoor lighting kits and alarm systems. I took Ellie with me and Will stayed home with Karen. I picked up a couple of lights with motion sensors for the two back corners of the fence. Alarms are pretty nice these days, but I thought a dog would be better and no more expensive than the monitoring fees. Ellie enjoyed the outing. We stopped for a lunch date at a local diner. We talked about the new house and what she liked and what she didn't like about it. No surprises. She picked out a couple of pralines at the counter. She and Will were allowed one junk food treat per week. Dad came over to supervise the project. Ellie assisted by being the tool finder. For her age, she was great at picking out tools as I requested them. In less time than I'd imagined possible, we were done. It had taken almost all day. Karen puffed out a sound like a drum roll and flipped the switch. Nothing happened. Then I remembered, motion sensor. I walked through the backyard and then there was light. Great, one less thing on my list, and surely the lights would keep our family safe from prowlers and thieves? Maybe. That evening we broke out the pralines. Ellie finished about half of her. Will took one bite and spat out the sweet, gooey confection. I had an inspiration and took the crumbs and spread a small share at the base of each gnome statue. Maybe the interwebs had been right. When we tucked the kids in that night, I checked the windows to ensure that they were closed and locked. We each checked the doors and put the little bar across the sliding door on the back patio. Flimsy, but it would, I hoped, cause noise and hopefully deter any of the most determined burglar. We turned on the patio light and flipped the switch for the back fence motion sensor light. Saturday night and another attack of the sleeping heebie-jeebies. The nightmare started the same way. Coldness, the dead cat, the spiky tree dancers, the gnomes, the cats, the yowl. Then I saw that the spiky creatures had a hold of each of my family members, and each was crying for help. They were muffled cries, dream sequence noises. Then I saw that the nearest monster had a hold of Ellie and dangled her over the space under Tom Salem's tree limb. It held her by the hair and grinned evilly at me. Then Ellie screamed, and the nightmare turned to pure darkness. Then my eyes snapped open. It was a real scream, from Ellie's room. I scrambled out of bed and snatched up the bat, then tore down the hallway to her room. I rushed in, and there she was, curled up against her headboard, clutching a small stuffed toy. She was pale and stared in horror at the window. I looked and saw to my own horror that it was slightly open. The curtains billowed. I rushed to the window and peered out into the now well-lit backyard. The sensor lights had worked. I saw a face looking back at me just before it disappeared over the back fence. The face was on the other side of the fence, and the lights were focused into the yard, so I could still not make out the features. Just a pointed hat and a scruffy, hairy face, then nothing. I wanted to go out and hop the back fence and chase down this turd, but I had to stay and comfort our little girl. Karen had gone to the next room to scoop up Will. Ellie had screamed loudly enough to disturb even him, zonked or not. They all piled together in our bed, while I went to the door to speak to the police when they arrived. I had plenty of time to put on some clothes before they knocked. Big Belly was back, followed quickly by a younger, earnest-looking officer. They were nice enough, took my statement, asked a few questions, complimented the light system and my speed in installing it, blah, blah, blah. They once again assured me that they would step up their patrols in Amblewood. Honestly, that was about all they could do. The earnest officer looked for footprints around Ellie's window and looked for scuffs on the back fence. There were enough traces to show that someone had been there, but no real evidence. He looked around at the garden gnomes. You say the intruder had a beard and wore a pointy hat? He raised his eyebrows, wearing the ghost of a smile. Yes, but he was taller and more animated. His smile melted into a genuinely friendly expression. I was sure they had better things to do on a Saturday night than to comfort whiny suburbanites. I don't mean to make light of the situation, sir, he quickly assured me. It's just, well, no offense, but I wouldn't creep through this backyard with those fellows on guard. I smiled back reassuringly. Me neither. They belong to the previous owner. We just haven't decided what to do with them. The big officer shuffled his way towards his cruiser and said over his shoulder, "Good night, y'all. Have a good one now." The younger officer paused for a moment. "If you hear or see anything else, please don't hesitate to call. Sir, I'm not putting down our service or police in general, but remember that when you need help in seconds, the police will be there in minutes. Response time is based on many factors and is always just a reaction. You may want to get ahead of the crooks. By the way, we really will patrol over here as much as possible. Please be safe." Wow, nice cop. I wasn't sure about the husky fellow, but the other two officers I'd encountered seemed at least to care, even if they really offered no solutions. I went back inside and told Karen everything. She said that the earnest officer was likely letting us know that we were on our own, at least for any effective action. I agreed and looked woefully at my bat. I needed something that would reach out and whack the scumbag. Maybe we needed a dog. Cats and gnomes hadn't helped. For now, the kids would sleep in our room. Karen and I were more scared for them than they were for themselves. Sunday rolled by like a dream. We spent the day at Mom and Dad's. My sister and her husband and kids had stopped by for dinner. Towards the end of the day, I stepped out into the backyard to do what I imagined was a security check. Something seemed off. Then I realized with a start, the yard was once again immaculate. Odd. Maybe the interweb posters were more correct than usual. Who would have thought that gnomes liked pralines? I tried some sleuthing once again, clambering up onto a chair to peer over the back fence. A few indistinct tracks, a couple of small indentations, ladder prints maybe? Dude had carried a ladder? Freak, by the time I'd gotten back inside, I'd forgotten about the well-manicured lawn. Karen and I talked, and the more I thought about it, the more angry I became. This had to stop. We had some weirdo wanting to do who knows what lurking around our backyard at night. No easy feat with an 8-foot-tall fence around it. I was afraid that he might become more determined or maybe change to more effective tactics. I must have had nightmares. I wasn't sleeping well and got up to check the doors and windows. As I walked through the kitchen, the sensor lights out back activated. I quickly opened the blinds over the sliding glass door. I didn't immediately see anything. Then there was movement by Ellie's window. I removed the security bar, opened the door, and stepped out, ready to beat the tar out of the slimy creep. But no one was lurking outside the window or anywhere in the yard. Something had to have set off the lights. Then I heard a faint mew. Lady Grey sat under Ellie's window, looking perplexed. "Cats," I grumbled, then locked up the fort and stumbled back to bed. Had to rest before work tomorrow. We made it to the middle of the next week with no more incidents. We kept the cats fed, but not too much. We needed them to hunt. They left us presents by the patio door, all sorts of dead creatures or parts thereof. At least one small copperhead, Good job, cats. You go. I'm really fond of cats. Aren't I? I quietly bought a box of cookies, not the kind that feature the little elves, but the less expensive store brand, and stored the box next to the generic cat food. We were on a budget. Even more quietly, I put out one per day per gnome. The yard stayed immaculate, and the smiles were present and not quite as sinister. Whatever, sometimes we just have to go with the flow. Wednesday night, we were pretty much back in routine. The kiddos were back in their rooms, no sign of creepy crawlers. The nightmares had never truly left, but they had faded on waking. Until tonight. The dead kitty took center stage once again. I'd gone through Mom and Dad's back gate to bury her, but the pitiful little corpse was gone. Probably a buzzard. Yet here she was in all her horrific glory. Disgusting open wounds, apparently, as she reached for me with bloody and mangled front paws and enormous claws. Her maw gaped, and she grew saber-toothed fangs. The spiky shadow creeps had added a chant to their menacing dance, and several carried spears, like they needed them. The gnomes rose on either side of me and rode the living cats like ponies, circling me, and then Karen and the kids were with me, tied up at my feet and screaming in fear. Then a gigantic black cone arose, like the gnomes rising from the ground, but in front of me, a bearded face and gaping, slavering maw. Ugh! I woke suddenly, and my side of the bed was soaked in sweat. How does Karen sleep through this? I wondered briefly. I quietly got up, picked up the bat and new long flashlight, and went on a patrol. Okay, I peed first. Never pass up an opportunity. Windows and doors were secure. Motion light was activated. Door bar secure. What? I looked out of the patio doors and around the backyard. It was brightly lit, so something had moved through in the past several minutes. I opened it and stepped outside to look along the edges of the house and to shine the flashlight into the brush. Nothing. Probably the cats, I grouched as I closed the sliding door. I went in to check the young'uns. Will, you guessed it, zonked. Ellie also looked pretty peaceful. There was something clutched in her arm, likely one of the menagerie of stuffed animals. Crap! Did the toy just move? It did. I thought it might be another nightmare as a fuzzy-looking ball rose from the crook of my little girl's arm. Spikes twitched at the top of the ball, then green glowing eyes popped open and blinked, then slitted ominously. Meow, declared Lady Grey. Cats! I screamed internally. Then I noticed that the window was wide open. Ellie must have forgotten to close it when she let in her little friend. Well, that explains the gray and white hairs. Mystery solved, Scoob, I thought as I slid shut the window and flipped the lock into place. As I turned to sneak back out of the room, I was distracted as Lady Grey leapt to the foot of the bed. I turned my head at the movement, and as a result, dodged a large meat-hook fist that would have knocked me cold. Instead, it just glanced my left ear, stung, and instantly galvanized my adrenaline. I stepped back as a second fist, this one clutching a small knife, thrust at my midsection. A figure in a black hoodie, the peak of the hood standing tall, emerged from the shadow. A bearded face with shiny bits of metal embedded or attached to several areas loomed over me. I backhanded the flashlight across the knife and let it drop. The rolling obstacle caused the lurching monster to step back and hiss. Then I grabbed my bat and swung for the fences. Isn't it amazing how great it feels when your family looks at you as a home-run hero? Little kids look to parents that way anyway, but it's nice when we've actually done something to warrant that feeling. like bashing in the head of a sick psycho who wanted to take our baby girl, leaving the scum to lay on the floor bleeding while you picked up your child and the heroic little furball that has become your new favorite pet and whisk them away to safety. To get to relate the tale to your favorite police officers as they figure out which one gets to ride with the injured prisoner in the ambulance and which gets to go back on patrol. To smirk at the fat cop who showed up late, now sporting corporal stripes. Great. Figures he'd be the one they promoted. It's even greater feeling to get back to normal. It wasn't easy. The creeper had definitely generated new levels of nightmares. My new buddy, Officer Green, or Chucky, met up with me during our respective lunch breaks and filled me in on the status of the creeper. "Looks like you won't need to testify after all," he said. "Dude died." I must have assumed that, or, "Oh crap, I killed him," look, because he quickly put up a calming hand. "Your bashing him on the skull wasn't the cause. He had a concussion from that, but it didn't kill him. Seems he was addle-brained from the get-go. We had him cuffed to the hospital bed rail, as we do with any prisoner, and an officer on watch. Dude went nuts. Started screaming, pulling on the cuffs, trying to get away. He kept screaming something about hoot owls, maybe? Something similar. They gave him a dose of vitamin T. Oh, wait. I held up my hand in turn. What is vitamin T? He grinned. Thorazine. Pretty powerful stuff. They use it on people having psychotic episodes. It knocked him out for a while. Probably not good in combination with his concussion, but he was tearing up his own wrists trying to get loose. Our officer said that he seemed to want to run rather than fight. Guy was a real piece of work. He lived in the woods behind the strip center. He never would have said, but something drew him to your place. No idea why he kept trying to get into Ellie's room, except that it was the easiest way to get into your home. That nightmare scumbag wanted to... I choked a little at the thought of what he wanted to do to my baby girl. Chucky put his hand on my arm to comfort me. Not so sure. This guy was a loony, but there was no history on him like that. A couple of drunk and disorderly charges. You know, this is confidential, right? I'm not supposed to talk about criminal histories. I nodded, and he continued. He had been in a private mental facility in his teens. Typical, refused to take his prescription meds, then he started to find his own meds on the street. He's been homeless for nearly a decade. Still, no burglaries, no assaults, nothing. He moved into the woods some time ago, maybe in the past year, and dropped off the radar. Detectives spoke and some of the other local derelicts. They knew him, but hadn't seen him in a long while. Most thought he was dead or in jail. Oh, remember how we said we'd look into the woods? We did. We found what we believe was his camp. Creepy. Did you know there was a cave in those woods? I shook my head. No, we played there all the time when we were kids. I'm sure we would have found something like that. Not really common in this area. He nodded. Agreed, but there it was. Not very big and smelled awful. Worse than most hobo dens. It took a detective who used to work homicide in the city to go in. He was the only one who could stomach the smell. He got inside and nothing but a few blankets, a set of clothes, and an expired state ID with the creeper's name on it. Howard Blackhawk. He was some kind of native. There was a small crack at the back of the cave that led downward. Too small for the detectives or the creeper to get through. He told us that the smell came from the crack, called it the butt crack of the dead in hell. At this he laughed at the gallows humor. Anyway, he continued when I just nodded, no sign that the dude did anything there but sleep and stash his stuff. Not even a fire pit out front of the entrance. He may have used that crack as a garbage chute and toilet. Not really clear. Thing is, he managed to slip his cuffs while the new corporal was taking a turn watching him. Old Howie slipped his cuffs and climbed out through the window. Corporal Randolph walked in about that time. Howie looked at him and said, "They're coming." I couldn't do what they said, but they're coming anyway. Then he dove head first into the concrete sidewalk in the courtyard. Only 3 stories, but he made an impressive mess. Problem solved. I sat there, reconsidering my newfound friendship. "So, nothing more for us to do on this?" "Nope, you're free and clear, buddy. No loss with that guy." He went on in that vein for a while, and then we wrapped up and went back to work. Before he left, he told me that Randolph was busted back to officer, and the female officer, Burns, was promoted in his place. So I passed the news on to the family, and we struggled for a while to get past the Black Hawk Down incident, as we'd taken to calling it. Yet we made it through the next few months, and were fairly sane when our newest bundle arrived. The house was sane, yes, but hardly calm. Grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, a protective big sister, a jealous big brother, and of course a glowing mother. The supernatural nightmares had been forgotten, and the real one resolved. Life was good. A few nights after our new addition was home, I plunged back into the throes of the nightmare realm. It was a Friday night, and I was exhausted with the kids. I had to take them while Karen handled the new poop factory eating machine. We had a blast, and all ate entirely too much junk food that evening. This time I awakened about 3 a.m. No nightmare. Eyes just tinked open. I felt awake, like I'd just gulped down a few cups of coffee. I checked the baby, no worries. Did a quick patrol, all was secure. Children properly zonked. For some reason, I felt the need to check the patio door a second time. As I approached it, the motion lights activated. Seriously? I stepped outside to look around and didn't immediately notice anything amiss. Likely the cats. Wait, was that chanting coming from the woods? I gulped and then looked carefully at the yard. The gnomes were all facing the back fence. The cats, Tom Salem on the right, were lined up on the big tree limb, all staring out into the backwoods. None of them seemed to be paying attention to me. The chanting grew louder and more ominous. I felt that old familiar chill, and the lights somehow dimmed. The feeling that the sounds that emanated from the woods communicated a threat grew very strong within me. There had been more construction on the far side of the patch, and the developers and destroyed just a little bit more of the woods, but hey, we could use yet another grocery store. Brrr. I shivered. Please let this be another nightmare. I realized that the chanting now included gnashing and scraping and clinking, and that it was not only louder, but closer. I hefted the flashlight and bat and stalked towards the back fence. I had purchased a ladder that currently rested against the big oak that was opposite Tom's. I'd forgotten to put away the thing, just as well. I tucked the flashlight under my arm and clutched my bat in the same hand and awkwardly ascended the ladder. Once I'd cleared the top of the fence, I realized that the darkness I'd noted was not from the dimming of the lights, but from the darkening of the woods out back. A deep dimness, like a moonless night, had descended over the woods and had begun to encroach into the bare space between the trees and the backside of the fence. Then I saw them, the spindly, spiky figures, all lines and angles. They were silhouetted against the nearly black backdrop. Figures that brought a new meaning to blackness, more an absence of light, as though they were from a plane where light did not exist, except for sickly orange glow of their eyes. Yet parts of them glinted, the teeth and claws and tips of primitive weaponry, each eager to be soaked in gore. I noticed that the shadow line had stopped growing towards the fence, even though the figures still approached. Then I saw little cones rise from the ground. 5 of them. The gnomes emerged from the soil, each gripping his tool as a weapon. They appeared animated and alive, and little puffs of steam emerged from their faces as their breath caught the cold night air. The hatchet man spared me a glance that contained a clear look of ferocity and determination. He quickly turned back to face the threat of the onrushing horde. It was a battle for the ages, in miniature. The gnomes were each no more than 2 feet tall, and the hobgoblins, or whatever the spiky things were, averaged about 3 feet tall. They met and merged into a fierce fight, weapons glinting and clashing. The gnomes were outnumbered but seemed to be holding their own. Each chanted in deep, guttural voice. Vorwarts! Zerguschen sie! Nimm sie aus! Forward! Crush them! Gut them! No idea how I knew that. Then the cats leapt into the fray and filled in the gaps in the line of gnomes. They added their own spitting, clawing, biting efforts to the struggle. The monsters were falling back towards the woodline. The gnomes and cats pressed the fight. Where's Tom Salem? I thought. He'd be able to finish the battle. Then I felt myself falling backwards from my perch. An inky form larger than the average monsters clutched at my head and shoulders. The ground rose up and knocked the breath from me. I felt a sharp pain in my upper right shoulder as the spiky monster thrust his spear home. He leered at me, then leaned in to take a bite out of my face. He didn't make it. Tom Salem sailed through the air and latched onto his head and shoulders in turn. The proportions between the hobgoblin and me and those between Tom and the hobgoblin were oddly symmetrical, almost as though planned. Tom soon had the creature expending all of its energy and focus to remove him rather than to attack me. I took a much-needed, if brief, moment to recover my breath and my flashlight. I had no idea where the bat had gone. I managed to stagger to my feet. The shoulders ached like a migraine, but my arm was otherwise numb and dangled uselessly at my side. I saw that the monster had started to gain the upper hand on Tom as they spat and rolled and fought all around the near-perfect lawn. I found an opening when the monster pinned Tom to the ground and raised its spear for the murder strike. I came down overhand with the flashlight and put a serious dent in its head. I spun the device in my good hand and shined the beam of light into its baleful eyes. Their glow was gone, and the figure slumped to the ground and dissolved into the soil. Good one, Tom. You are my main cat, I exuberantly called out to my battle companion. I glanced at where he had been, and to my horror, I saw he was pinned to the ground with the spear. He did not move. He did not breathe. I was suddenly filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. I raced to the ladder and shifted it so that it rested against the fence, then climbed and clambered over the top. The battle still raged, and some of my army had taken damage. It was a stalemate, just inside the line of trees. Then I arrived like an ancient berserker. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the faces of the wicked horde. They blanched and were clearly blinded for a moment. My troops pressed forward, shredding the nasty creatures. Then I waded into the fray, my proportionately giant legs kicking goal after goal, and the end of my flashlight sunk several holes into one-shots, the beam turning manically in all directions as I swung the instrument like a giant club. It was too much for the invading throng. They fled back into the woods, the darkness retreating with them. I stood there, breathing heavily and peering out through the trees. The cats sat, or laid and licked their wounds. I caught sight of 5 little red cones as they sunk into the soil. It was over. We'd won. Then I realized I couldn't climb back over the fence, certainly not with a broken wing. I hung my head and began to trudge around the cul-de-sac. I paused briefly at the back gate that led to my parents' backyard. Nope, their new Rottweiler Prince would eat me alive until Dad came out and shot me. Sure, I could have used Prince in the fight. Dad's shotgun, too. Oh, great. I'm in my sleeping clothes. No key, I thought gloomily. Then I wondered how Karen and the kids could have slept through that affray. My screams alone should have awakened at least half the neighbors. As I walked, the pain in my shoulder receded, and some sensation returned to my arm and hand, though I still felt a chill in them, and blood still trickled from my shoulder. Thing had been stabbing at my neck. It had meant to kill me. I knew I had just checked the front door from the inside to ensure that it was locked, but like most primates, I tried it anyway. It opened. I entered and immediately did a check on my family. Each was appropriately zonked, and none appeared to have stirred, except Ellie, who had turned on her side when Lady Grey had fled her little arms and charged into battle. Budget or not, the cats and gnomes would get premium brands for at least the next week. Milk, too. I sneaked into the bathroom and checked my wound in the mirror. It wasn't that big around, but it was deep. I cleaned it out and found some gauze to stuff into it. The dumbness had definitely improved. The coldness was all but gone. There might be nerve damage, but I was suddenly exhausted. I barely managed to crawl in beside Karen before I passed out. I slept through the family chaos of my Saturday morning until nearly noon. I was sore and stiff and anxious to check on my family and my troops. I suddenly realized that I'd left Tom Salem's body outside, pinned by that fiend's spear. I hobbled into the living room and greeted everyone with a hug and kiss. Karen looked at me curious, the new baby suckling away all the while. "You okay, Clay? You look terrible." "There was an incident last night. I'll give you the details in a moment. Hey, please keep the kiddos inside for a few. I need to check something in the backyard," I said as I stepped over the patio door. She just smiled and nodded. The strangeness didn't seem to register with her, though apparently the gnomish memory trick had stopped for me. I remembered the entire night. I ended up wrapping Tom's corpse in a big beach towel. He really was large and heavy. I placed him under the limb of his tree and realized I'd have to dig a grave mostly one-handed. I managed. Then I went back inside to explain what happened to my lovely bride. She grilled me until she realized I was injured. I got Dad to drive me to the emergency clinic in that stupid strip center on the other side of the woods. Coincidence? I got better over the next week. No real damage, and the memories of my injury faded from Karen's memory. The kiddos were unfazed, and when I tried to thank Dad one last time for driving me to the clinic, he just gave me a WTF look with one of his eyebrows raised. The gnomes all stood around, a bit worse for wear, some chipped paint and a few gouges in their ceramic, yet each wore a self-satisfied, vaguely arrogant smile. The cats still came around to eat, sleep, and hunt, and whatever else cats did. I was absolutely sure I still wanted a dog, but I loved our cats. I also needed to know more about what happened so we could avoid future warfare. I called Mrs. Burton and asked about Mrs. Richmond. "Oh, my dear," she started with a catch in her breath. "I guess I forgot to tell y'all. We just buried Mama the day before yesterday. She died early last Saturday morning." "I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am." We exchanged a little more talk of condolences, and then I decided to just go for it. "Mrs. Burton, the same night your mother passed, we had an incident here at the house, more specifically in the backyard." "In the backyard?" she hesitantly inquired. I rushed on, fearing she'd make an excuse to hang up the phone. "Yes, ma'am, it involved cats, gnomes, and some kind of creatures from the woods out back. I was injured and I fear for my family. Is there something you want to tell me? Something you should have told us before you sold us the house?" Silence. Though I could tell she was still there, just gathering her thoughts. You may find this hard to believe, but my memories about this have only started to return since Mama passed. Her family brought over the gnomes from Germany. They were related to the guy who invented them. The garden variety, that is. I'm not sure about the cats. She told me the gnomes were there to protect our home and the neighborhood. She said to make sure to feed them. No idea what garden gnomes could do to protect anybody, or what to feed ceramic figures. Likely just stupid stition. You know how old folks are. The monsters are something Mama called Hutao. I'm not sure where they came from, but she said that they were some kind of native land sprite that got stirred up every time someone cut down part of the woods. She wasn't sure why they'd attack our yard in particular, but thought it might have something to do with the big oaks on either side of the fence. Maybe being some kind of gateway into our world. I don't know. I really don't know much about it. I was grown when they moved into that house. She only told me recently about all this stuff. I thought it was just her dementia, which had actually improved after she left the house. Funny, though, I only recently remember her telling it. She hesitated again. I think they may have killed my father. I never believed he fell off a ladder. I thanked her, again offered my condolences, then hung up and went back to my family. Life was good. We named the black lab puppy T.S. in honor of old Tom Salem. He grinned and gambled in the yard with that goofy, hoppy puppy gait, sniffing and peeing like a good little boy. The cats pretended to ignore him, as they would any dog that behaved in such a dorky, doggish way. They sat or lay, aloof on their own various perches, each attempting to display her battle scars in the best light. Cats are awesome. T.S. was doing his best to mark everything in the new territory as his. Dogs and human toddlers can be similar when it comes to property rights. Then I realized where he was headed, and a wicked grin spread on my face. The gnomes, as they watched T.S.'s progress towards them, looked horrified. So quoth this raven. A huge thanks to Bear for his wonderful story that he allowed me to share with you. I hope you enjoyed the videos. I appreciate you all so very much for coming and listening to me. It just amazes me that you would want to do so. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, and Tabby Cat. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.